How's it going, everyone? Welcome to TheBlueShifting and welcome to Yakuza. So this is interesting. I'm doing an intro. Normally I have like the full trailer playing in the background at the beginning and we have walk in, but because this is going to basically have so many just raw visuals involved, I'm going to just go ahead and just do this as it is here. And yeah, welcome to kind of what I call the wrap party. In case you're new to this, basically anytime I finish a series, I like to kind of go into a deep dive breakdown of the game. The characters, the motivations, the stuff that makes it more interesting, compelling to me. Ultimately, just whatever is that I found the most engaging about the story itself. So I'm going to go talk about it. It's going to be full spoilers. Even the visuals we're going to have are going to be full spoilers. Like, this is still the beginning of the game, but, you know, if you're still here, just kind of heads up for that. But usually, if you're either here live or you are watching this in the playlist, you've already seen me complete the series, and we're all good there. So, hopefully, you find this interesting, engaging. There's not going to be a whole lot. Like, sometimes there's a lot to dive into, but frankly, this series, whilst fun, isn't overly complicated. Again, when this is coming from the perspective of someone who does visual novels, I'm talking, like, literally a book's worth of content that I cover. So and I wouldn't say that Yakuza has quite that much. There's a lot to the game, but a lot of it comes down to gameplay, challenges, and kind of trying to, you know, overcome barriers of skill which don't translate to great content in video form, at least in my opinion. I don't feel like I make that good content. At least I don't make it as dynamically interesting as maybe others can. I don't know how live streamers do it, honestly. Like, I know people who can do full live streams of games like this, and it's just like, how do you do that? I don't know. But here we are. Thank you so much for joining me. Hope you're enjoying yourselves. And yeah, this is going to be basically my review, my intentions and interests in the game and why it was so good. And we also have to say, kind of like the elephant in the room, this is in the shadow of being of Yakuza 0. Now, obviously, this is different from the original Yakuza, like the original core Yakuza game when it came out. It was its own thing, and so like Yakuza Kiwami is rebuilt after using the same engine as 0, and there's a lot of just overlap there. And I feel like I'm going to talk about that in detail, but I'll say, like, in summary, I feel like this is a boon and a curse. I feel like the series benefited a lot from the upgrade, but I also feel like that the upgrade itself denotes a larger problem that I'm likely going to witness as we go. But again, this is all just theoretical. Also, of course, at the end of this, after I go through all the points that I want to cover, I will also be doing a formal reveal of the next game we're going to be playing. Although, if you've been following the channel at all, you probably already know where we're going after this. But I always do like the official reveal at the end of it all. So, let's go ahead and get started. Thieves of Heart, you're here. Good to see you. You're saying I'll just be here for a bit since I haven't finished it, but it's a great, ambitious series. Yes, absolutely. Don't overstay your welcome, and like I don't want you to accidentally get too spoiled on stuff. But also, I'll say that the story isn't unpredictable. So it's not like when it comes to like the core of the actual like narrative, there weren't too many reveals that were like kind of, I don't know, too grandiose. Probably the best stuff in the game that you can protect yourself from are the side quests, and we'll get into that a little bit as well. But before I talk about the gameplay, I do want to focus on the characters. So let's start with Kiriu. Kiriu being the main character, he is like the definition of the best hembo I've ever seen. And like just this idea, he's like this really tough, strong guy who's about as dense as rocks, and he's got a brain about as filled with them. But you gotta love the guy. He has principles. He stands up for those principles. He's willing to go like to the ends of the earth if it means like doing what he feels is right. And that's like, it's so funny because like I don't know if you could ever have a character who could be such an inspirational, heroic person whilst being engaged in directly in a crime family. Like, he's in a Yakuza. They're a mafia. They swindle, they steal, they beat people down. Some are willing often to kill people. So you take that setting, and you somehow make a character that feels heroic, that feels investigative, like somebody you want to be invested in, and you feel like what you could believe. And it's a very neat trick to pull off. That's something that genuinely is very difficult to do in the writing sense. I mean, a good example is thinking about like GTA 5. I'm pretty familiar with that, played through the whole game, and especially the main story of that. And while the story was really compelling, by the end of it, you kind of follow like Michael, Trevor, and oh shoot, I know, it's Franklin. They're the characters you play in the story, and then at the end of the game, you kind of focus on Franklin, who's kind of like the young blood, and he gets to make a choice that determines the ending you get. And I thought that was really interesting, but when it came right down to it, I remember thinking, I made the choice where he didn't betray his friends, but at the risk of his own life. But when I got to the end, I kind of sat back and I was like, I don't really like anybody in this game. Franklin's probably the one I liked the most in that, but it was hard to even cheer for him, because it's hard to cheer for someone who's so willing to do terrible things to other people in order to, profit themselves. Kiriu is someone you can just get behind. He's someone you can be like, yeah, I want to be there. I want to be like you. I want to be your friend. I want to be around you. And so it's just he's so wholesome in a mire of just filth, you can't help but cheer for him. Thieves, you also said that predictable story isn't bad. There's a lot more to a story than the plot, especially in a video game. Yes, because gameplay is such a part of a video game in such a compelling manner. You're absolutely right. A story doesn't have to be earth-shattering. And in fact, there's a lot of games that ruin themselves trying to, oh no, we got this big mystery, or oh, we have this big plot twist. They build themselves up trying to be that unique and memorable story and end up falling flat on their butt because they just fall short into like some of the stuff that matters the most, which is, being able to have fun, being able to enjoy the game. So yeah, you're right. A predictable story isn't bad. It has to meet a predictable story met with proper execution is fantastic. And then there's also stuff like Disney movies are a good example, like classic Disney movies too. Especially one of my favorites growing up was like Beauty and the Beast. Like that movie is painfully predictable, right? Like that story is painfully predictable. It's something we all grew up with. It's a very basic story, but yeah, I would still claim to this day it's one of the better movies I've seen because it's good. Its execution is so well. And I think Yakuza games have a lot of good execution. So Kiriu, as a character, fantastic. You can't help but want to be like his cheerleader. You're controlling him in the game. You go through the fights with him, but yet every time he goes through a decision, even if he makes a blunder or just becomes like walks around like a big idiot, you still love him to pieces. And that's a fantastic execution. There's a reason why he is a legend as a character. There's a reason why the Yakuza series survives and thrives, and it's largely because Kiriu. Now, I know that in the future they have spin-offs where Kiriu isn't a main character. I know he can make some cameos, but the whole idea is that's the thing. It's the greatest extent from what I understand it's just cameos, call-outs, not necessarily a focus on him. And that's good. It's good that they're making a series and it's successful enough that it's had following sequels. And that's good. That makes me excited because that means that they didn't get so hitched up to Kiriu as a character that they couldn't functionally make other games that were compelling and interesting. So that's really, really cool to see. Really, really good to see. I'm very happy about that. Now we got him dancing around the screen for a while, and now he's going to dance away, but I got to say the next character I want to focus on, which is funny because he's not a main character, it's Majima. Majima is such a good character as well, but this is where we start seeing the cracks that have formed because of the fact that this is a remake. Majima is probably my favorite character in the games I played. I played Zero and I played Kiwami now, and Majima in both games is still my favorite. But in this game, he's an antagonist almost exclusively. Where in Yakuza 0, he was a protagonist. He was a co-protagonist with Kiriu. But the thing is that he as a character in his story left such a powerful impression on me in 0, it's carried over into this game. So despite the fact that he and the Majima Everywhere system was the most frustrating part of my gameplay experience, and went from okay, this is fun, okay, this is manageable, and eventually at the end it became a sense of dread where I just did not want to bother with it anymore. And that wasn't because fights aren't fun, but when he's got like 5 or 6 health bars and he's fighting you every single time you're walking in the streets, it made it a pain just to do stuff. I would be recording for 4 hours and maybe get an hour's worth of interesting content to make a video out of. Again, not because the fights are bad, but because they just take so long. And it's something I hope they fix. I think it would benefit, this series would benefit by having shorter, intense fights rather than these long, drawn-out slugfests. Because the slugfests are challenging in their own right, but they also are, I don't know, they're so detrimental to the experience because when you don't have, like, when a lot of the fights that it'll ultimately come down to, they come down to, like, you learn the pattern of, like, how does this character behave? How does this character act? What do they, like, what types of attacks do they use? And what can I block? What can I evade? And once you figure out the pattern, you just kind of end up repeating yourself over and over. The best example I can think of is with the fights with Majima, when he's doing his, the pink flavored, the breakdancing fights, which is, again, carryover from Zero, which I did like. But when you're doing those, his combos are so unbreakable, and he can always orient himself in your direction because of the way that the AI kind of cheats in the combat systems. It makes it so that basically you'd run in, get some hits in, and then you dodge away, and you have to wait for him to go through all of his combos, and then you could go back and engage him again. Making it such a painful experience to fight him that it became a problem. And so I wonder if the players who were playing the original Yakuza game, I imagine that Majima was an antagonist throughout that game. Without the context of Zero, I imagine that there's 2 things that came across with him. Number one, he was probably just a really annoying antagonist who kept popping up and kind of interrupting your game flow. But I don't know if it was as invasive as it is in the current iteration of the game. I get the impression it wasn't as fleshed out of a system then, and thus he was probably more of just like, I don't know, like the equivalent of Pokemon walking in the tall grass in Pokemon, where you just occasionally like, uh-oh, here's an encounter, and you got Majima there. I also think that inside the storylines, they made so many direct references to Zero that again makes me think that some of the side stories or some of the more like creative encounters with Majima, while memorable and fantastic, and I wouldn't want them to go away, I feel like they are this holdover from how Majima probably started as just this kind of like side character. So Yankee, you're saying Majima Everywhere System wasn't even in the original? Yeah, that doesn't even surprise me. It feels like it was kind of shoehorned in. I thought it might have some kind of presence in there, but if you're saying it wasn't in there at all, that means Majima's appearances in the core game probably were just related to some of the core like story moments, like when Haruka got kidnapped. Maybe he lured you out to a bridge fight, not a bridge fight, the Bayside fight with the taxi, and then the fight in the big palace area. You fight Majima like 2 times in OG, yeah. So that's kind of crazy to me. What that tells me is that Majima started off as this like side character, and then as the games progressed in the series, like Yakuza and the Yakuza 2, and then whatever came after Yakuza 2, Majima probably became a fan favorite, where the fans were like, oh yeah, we love Kiriu, but Majima, like, he's got that eye patch, he's always acting wacky, like, he's pretty fun, like, he's an enjoyable character. And as he got more popular, they started putting him into, like, more and more center place in the games. And that made him get more popular. And so eventually they get to this point that when they go back to do Yakuza 0, they're like, what if we do a Majima and Kiriu origin story? And at that point, Majima's then been sealed basically as another protagonist. So then when they do this remake of Kiwami, they're like, well, we have to have more Majima. And so Majima's just everywhere. And, like, it's just a lot. It's a lot. I feel like they overdid it. And that's why I said, like, that's the curse of having this remake be done. There's a lot of benefits I can see from it. And I imagine that the polish is so phenomenal. but now you got this reverberation effect where now it's like they retroactively have to try and start making all these call outs and setting up all these like future scenes. It's kind of like, it reminds me of the problem that happened with like Star Wars. You had Star Wars 4, 5, 6 classics, fantastic, interesting story, interesting characters. But then when they did the prelude stories, because they were working from backwards, they kind of felt like they had to shoehorn all these references to events and situations that happened in the original series, and it felt so forced that it felt artificial and gross. And I feel like that's kind of what happens here as well. So Yankee, you came back. You said the Bay fight was explained. Why is Majima everywhere? Whole system stopped, and fixed the plot hole of why he crashed the building. And it wasn't in the original. Okay, yeah. So the Bay fight wasn't in the original, but the crashing into the building was. Yeah, that would seem really out of the blue all of a sudden if that was the only other time you really saw Majima. So I'm kind of glad they fixed that. Like, there's some parts of that where like it makes sense, but it just became overbearing after a while. Now that being said, I can't remember the exact name he used, but nothing will top the epicness that was going on the date with Gorigi or Goromi, maybe Goromi. That was the date with Goromi, or Majima's alter ego, was such a funny surprise that to this day, I think that's probably my favorite part of this entire game. So it's not that the additions of Majima and the changes they made are bad. There's a lot of good that came with it. But the Majima Everywhere system really was a lot. And I feel like it was probably, like, anytime you take a gameplay loop and it takes it from something I find is fun, that I sought out and was excited to engage with, and turned it into such a slog that I avoided it at every cost possible because I did not want to spend 4 hours of my time fighting Majima, that's not good. And that highlights a bit of the problem there. So we'll have to see. I'm curious to see how Majima gets incorporated in the future titles, and if they are going to continue this trap into Kiwami 2, because it feels like they will. Because I know Kiwami 2 was also remastered like this, but then I think if I go on to Yakuza 3, that will be maybe like a refresh version, but not a remade version. So that game will feel a lot more natural to what it was originally, and that might be interesting because, like, but yeah, besides just trying to play the origin Yakuza and Yakuza 2, I don't know if I'm too interested in doing. Maybe if it got like really, like, if there's a compelling reason for me to do that, maybe. But from what I can see, I feel like I heard from I've got a good friend who he was the one who like really pointed me in the direction of Yakuza. And he basically told me that there's not a whole lot you're missing by not playing the original, because like it was a much shorter, simpler game. And so, like, I guess I would be interested in hearing opinions on that. Like, is it worth going back and playing the original just to see the differences? Otherwise, I feel like it'll just be, I'll be able to kind of glean some of that feel from Yakuza 3. So Yankee, you said, question, how would you compare the Majima Everywhere system to the Mr. Shakedown of Yakuza 0, the wandering difficulty fights? Okay, now I like the Mr. Shakedown better because it wasn't shoved in your face as much. Now, if you weren't paying attention, you would kind of be wandering into those fights and it would be really rough. But I liked those fights better for two reasons. Number one, it was a lot more of a, hey, you can do this if you want, but it wasn't feeling like there was incredibly like important gameplay locked behind it. The dragon style, which is probably the strongest style in the game, is locked so heavily behind the Majima Everywhere system that it pretty much forces you that, hey, if you want to enjoy this entire branch of combat, you have to engage with this system to the SSS rank. And I feel like that is way too much to ask for a player, where the Mr. Shakedown, you're saying that they felt too punishing. They were too punishing, but they were still so optional that you, especially once you figured out how to recognize where they were, you could just avoid it if you didn't want to deal. And it wasn't tied itself too much to gameplay. Now money was super important to like the main and side stories of that game. So there was a motivation. Hey, if you get good enough at fighting and can take down Mr. Shakedown, he can give you a lot of money. So there's like, hey, for those people who want to engage with that gameplay loop and have the skill to do so, they can do it, and awesome. But the fact that I was able to go through that game and only fought Mr. Shakedown like 3 times tells a lot. Because, yeah, those fights are horrifically challenging and punishing, but they're optional. Almost similar to how the gladiator fights are. Like, that's an optional way to play and explore the fighting mechanics of the game in a much more dynamic and challenging way. But it's always been optional. There was nothing truly locked behind it. There were maybe some specialized fighting forms that you could unlock that way, but there was absolutely no reason for me to have to feel like I needed to complete it. Whereas with the Majima system, there's a lot of gameplay and accessibility that's locked behind it. And so I feel like that's the problem. If Mr. Shakedown was locking you away from core gameplay mechanics, then it would be just as bad, if not worse, than the Majima Everywhere. Because at least Majima Everywhere was entertaining, where Mr. Shakedown wasn't even that. It was just kind of like a thing. So I get what you're saying, Yankee, and I do think you're right. But I feel like between the two systems, I feel like the Majima Everywhere system does a greater disservice to the game as a whole, rather than the Mr. Shakedown, which is punishing, but you still could choose to engage with it if you wanted to or not. All right, so I feel like that's some of that. I think there's more of the gameplay mechanics I'll touch into later, but I kind of want to focus on the characters. So I want to talk about Nishiki. Nishiki's interesting because the way he was played in Yakuza 0, he has almost no plot relevance, but they made it a point to like interact with him and Kiriu, and I do think that was a good thing. I like how he was involved in like trying to like, he was tasked to eliminate like Kiriu because that makes sense for the situation in 0. And his emotions and his willingness to like his desire to stand up for his brother despite his own fears was really cool to see, and to have him eventually like actually decide to stand with Kiriu against the family was really cool. But this game really does Nishiki a lot better. I think Nishiki is a fantastic antagonist in this game because they have that bonding of brotherhood, which I wonder, without 0, I wonder if the original Yakuza explored the brotherly bond of love that Kiriu and Nishiki have. Now, granted, you see that in the scene that we're actually getting to here, when Kiriu walks in and sees Dojima shot, and Nishiki holding the gun, and he says like, here, give me the gun, you take Yumi, go. And then Nishiki's like, no, why, like, I'm not gonna do this. He's like, no, you don't understand, your sister needs you, I'm not gonna let you fail her, I'm going to fix this. I don't know if that would have had as much of a pull in the original game, and maybe that it didn't even exist. Maybe that was a plot contrivance that they edited. Maybe all this scene had was the rescue of Yumi, and then the elimination of the patriarch, and then Kiriu tried to save him from what happened. Yankee, as for the question about play order, I'd say playing the original, I'd say it's a curiosity for new players, but there are those who prefer the original for things like aesthetic, the same way people like old. Yeah, okay, yeah, that makes sense. Especially if that was your game. Like, if you started with the original, nostalgia itself might be enough to kind of make you be like, nah, the original is better. I actually wonder if that, if Legend of Heroes, because I'm so in love with the Legend of Heroes series now, and they're like the remake of the first Legend of Heroes game is coming out this September. I wonder if I'm going to feel like that too, because like it looks good so far. But like I just fell in love with even the old style and the art of the original game, and so I wonder if I'm also going to fall in that trap. But it sounds like when it comes to content-wise, there's really not a whole lot of loss there, so that's fair. So anyway, so back to Nishiki. What I love about Nishiki is he's such a great antagonist because you start off with this bond of love where Kiriu literally saves him from prison, basically saving his life. And then even though he's always hears over and over, man, if only Kiriu were here, he's like, yeah, obviously Kiriu is kind of like the superior in so many ways, but Nishiki avoids prison, he gets money, he even gets his own family because of what Kiriu does for him. And then it was odd to then come out of prison and have him be this bad guy, right? But the way they explored at the beginning of each chapter, a little flashback to his story, showing the progression of how the innocent, naive Nishiki who was protected from the worst thing, or his worst mistake by Kiriu, then became this antagonist and was he willing to try and fight and potentially even kill Kiriu. That journey is so well done. It was a good job of being like, okay, so yeah, Yankee, you're saying that the flashbacks were the in-between stuff that were added. Yeah, no, I think that added way better context. I imagine Nishiki just looked like an a-hole in the original if he got saved by Kiriu and then just betrays him. It'd be like, wow, what a jerk. But like being able to see that progression of how he started out, like he wanted to be good, but he was constantly in the shadow of Kiriu. And then he moves forward and he's pushed harder and harder and he makes mistake after mistake and he gets manipulated and manipulated and manipulated. And then finally he's kind of just snaps. And he realizes, you know what? The only lesson I've learned from this is that only the strong and those willing to do whatever it takes, regardless of the cost, are the ones that get things done and get the respect that they deserve. And that he takes that into his heart. It explains so much about his transformation, which I love. It meant that by the time we faced off with him at the end of the game, he wasn't this enigma a-hole. He was this genuinely kind of like warped individual that he absolutely was taking the wrong path and I couldn't stand for what he was doing, but I could sympathize with why he chose it, what he did, and the lessons that he'd been taught. And it's fascinating because Nishiki is such a good foil for Kiriu. Like Majima is this like really cool like antagonist like mirror image of Kiriu, but Nishiki's a better mirror of the person and the hero that is Kiriu, because Kiriu and Nishiki came from a similar background. They live in a similar Yakuza lifestyle. And then they both reacted so differently to that corrupting, twisted life, where Kiriu like sticks to his guns and sticks to his like mentality, despite like the crappiest hands being dealt to him. And Nishiki, getting similarly crappy hands dealt to him, succumbs and decides that the only way to survive is by brute force, because that's like it's a foil of what Kiriu could have been. And that's what's so fun to see, is because they came from the same place and you see they took wildly different paths, and to have them end up pointing them at each other is really cool. Sankey said, okay, so Kiwami added a lot of Nishiki scenes between. Now imagine how surprised people who played the original were when finally getting to Zero and seeing the Playboy guy is a tragedy in a different way. Yeah, again, that's probably why Yakuza 0 was received so well, is because when it came down to it, the updated gameplay looping, the explanations of characters that like, you know, lived and died in the first game, probably never got properly explored like in future games, because why would Kiriu do much more than reference Nishiki in the future games? So being able to get a flashback to some of the origins of these characters that define so many of the games of the early games like Majima and Nishiki, I think helps a lot. And then the remake of Kiwami just kind of solidified that in a lot of ways. So Nishiki is a jerk, and I feel like he kind of got his just desserts in the end. But I really loved his character and the way his story, the way it progressed, went from like this like bizarre, like why on earth is he doing this, to, oh, okay, I get it. And I think that's a great progression to have. And eventually has that final delivery where he sacrifices himself after being mortally wounded, and being able to kind of see that progression is really, I think it was really well done. Very, very well executed. And I'm very happy with Nishiki's story. All right, so I guess like we got to now talk about Yumi. Now Yumi is odd because it feels like, so Yumi must have had the original amnesia type story. So Yumi has the amnesia story, but the problem is that we already have seen that they're willing to replay that narrative, because that was almost identical to the story in Zero with Makoto. It's Makoto, right? I feel like I might be forgetting that name, but I'm pretty sure it was Makoto. Makoto being this like, oh, she has amnesia and she's blind. Or like, but it's like, is that going to be like a theme where all like the female heroine like love interest characters experience an amnesia at some point? Because if that becomes too repetitive, that's going to be annoying. It feels like a kind of, not a cheap Deus Ex Machina because it kind of works. And it's one of the only things that could really work in a lot of these stories. Like, Yumi's story doesn't work if she has her memories throughout the entirety of what happens. Because why would she get married and have or try to get engaged to and have a kid with like that like Doji or Doshi or whatever his name was, like Dogecoin, the political guy. Like, ironically, actually, he kind of is he's the politician / like influencer dude, like whatever his name was. Oh, Jingu, that's right, like Jingu. The reason why she why would she have a kid with him? Why would she like go along with his plans if she didn't have unless she had amnesia? So like, so much of the plot hangs on that choice to make that as a narrative. I just think that it's too easy an explanation to make these it makes things feel a bit contrived, especially if they're going to lean on that again in the future. So that's my worry. But as far as Yumi goes, character-wise, she's good. I think she's cute. I get why Kiriu likes her. We don't get a ton of her, especially until we see her at the end. But the problem is that the actions that she takes leading up to the finale are very inconsistent, and that's what's tough with her. So like, hear me out here. Sorry, I've been talking a lot and my throat's getting dry, so I'm occasionally like taking drinks of water. So she wakes up from her amnesia after someone tries to take her life and Haruka's life. Like, after that incident, she's like, oh, I remember now. So then she puts her child up for adoption in Sunflower. Questionable, but if she feels like that child is directly under threat and she's directly under threat, then perhaps it is the safest place to have her, especially with Kazuma promising to protect her, right? So then she goes back to the city and opens a bar. Okay, it doesn't really seem like the actions of someone who's trying to hide, but then she fakes her own identity. Okay, so maybe that could work. So then why, when Kiriu does get out of prison, why doesn't she reach out to him? She talks about how like she didn't remember until recently, but A, I feel like she'd remembered by the time he got out of prison, and B, she had the locket with his picture, so she should have still at least been able to recognize him. Tokyo, though, is a big place, so maybe it's just like literally just she might have been looking for him and they never crossed paths. Oh, I guess I didn't edit this part out like I was supposed to. Oh well. Whoopsies. I swore I did, but guess I didn't. Anyway, skipping that. It was just getting to the other sequences. So Yumi's decisions just don't seem that great to me. And then there was the other girl that got brought in that was like a body double for her. That seemed like a really odd trail that was meant to just kind of convince us that she was dead for a while. Like, it didn't feel like it meant a whole lot, and just like, it just means that like this random girl got a similar tattoo to Yumi and got killed because of it. And also that Nishiki didn't know it was Yumi because he tried to torture the girl but not kill her, but then maybe he did know. I don't know. The whole Yumi story felt very cobbled together. Like, they took these elements and they kind of had a sequence of events they wanted to happen. And then they had Yumi kind of fill in some of the gaps at the end. Like they wrote her into a corner and just kind of had her fill in wherever they had like gaps to be. But the story kind of there needs to be a little girl. There needs to be a murder mystery, and but then she also needs to be at the end of the finale. So odd. So as a character for the story, she feels too much like a Deus Ex Machina, like a means to just make the story move, which is unfortunate because I feel like she could have been explored and had a lot more depth to her. Because basically her whole role in the story is just to be Kiryu's former crush and Haruka's mom. Beyond that, it's just like she's just plot contrivances, which just sucks because it could have been so much more. But there you have it. So Yumi could have been better. Could have been worse, but also like it makes me wonder. Heck, I can even imagine like fans of the series in the future getting really torn up on whether or not Kiriu should get into a relationship or not, like a new relationship, because a normal human moves through their future, but now like Kiriu's ostensibly going to be helping to raise a child that he has nothing to do with, but essentially adopting her, which is fine. Like it's absolutely amazing to do that. But then like, is he going to be so hung up on Yumi as a pseudo mother that he got to see for a little bit? It's like, I don't know. I wonder how that's going to relate in the future games, because it feels very odd. Yankee, you're saying you do remember she became amnesiac due to shock and because of the trauma. Yeah, that's true. Like, and that's very real. Like, okay. So keep in mind, I'm not saying the amnesia didn't make sense, but I feel like there's a reason that amnesia is a trope, and it's because it is a very convenient tool to write into a story, because it lets you play with things like people conveniently not recognizing certain characters when that could have solved a lot of future problems. It lets you have these grand reveals at critical points in the story because you can have these memories on lock as a writer when you want them to. It's not that it doesn't work. It's the worry that I have is that it's a very convenient plot like method of writing a story. And the fact that in the two games of Yakuza I've experienced, which is 0 and Yakuza Kiwami, they both had amnesia related to trauma as the main inhibitor for the female heroic character. And so that is starting to seem like a trend I'm hoping doesn't continue, because you can write stories in other ways. And I have faith that the writers can do something different with that. So it's not that, again, I'm not trying to say like, oh, it's terrible writing because Yumi had amnesia. It's that I feel like because of the way it plays out, it leaves a lot on the table that could have been more interesting and dynamic ways to explore the characters. And Yumi doesn't really get much of a chance to shine other than her drive. And that's the other problem too. Like her plan at the end was to lure out like her enemies, which is basically Nishiki and like, oh gosh, I keep forgetting his name. Like the dirtbag who's like Haruka's dad, Jingu, I guess I think it is. Like her whole plan was basically to lure them and then detonate a bomb and to destroy the money. If she wanted to destroy the money, she should have destroyed the money like a while ago, right? Why did she hold on to it until this very dramatic conclusion? Maybe to show it off, or like to kind of make them watch their world and hopes burn. But it's such a risky thing to do when she could have destroyed the money and just not told anybody until the end, and then just be like, you did all of this and now, but it's too late, you've destroyed the money. Oh, Yankee, you said, yeah, I kind of had to remember this is a PS2 game. That's fair. But I also would point out that there's plenty of games that have come out in the 2000 PS2 or earlier generations that had fantastic writing, that had really well-developed characters and plot development. That just because there's a limit of hardware doesn't mean there's a limit in creativity. And in fact, I think that a lot of games from older generations, like I said, like the Legend of Heroes game series. I know people love Kingdom Hearts, so I've never played that series really. Like I keep starting it and then keep like turning it off. But then it's like the writing doesn't need to lean on something that's like as easily manipulated as amnesia, but it's fine. Just needs to be measured. But again, it's like this is a nitpicking thing. Remember, this is my opinion. This has nothing. It's like there's nothing wrong with disagreeing or having like or feeling like that everything's just fine with the series. Okay, I'm gonna see his name coming up in a second. Jingu. Yes, I got it right. Jingu. Okay. Now, moving on to I guess Jingu while he's here. His antagonist is a weaker antagonist, mostly because he doesn't enter the stage until like right at the end. And at the end, when they do reveal him, he's so involved in the plot, but in the most like super like pure evil way, it's hard to take him too seriously. His fight was the worst, I'll say. Like I didn't like the repetitive and constant like washing like combats and fights that happened with like Majima, but at least his fights were kind of fun. Jingu's fight just sucked. Just you're on a helipad with him and 3 operatives, and they all have guns, which are the worst part of the combat in this game. It makes sense. I think the guns are fine because they reflect like how overpowered a gun would be at a fist fight, even though like you could take so many bullets and not die. But that'd be too cruel. But like for gameplay wise, I get that the guns are supposed to be this like much higher tier and annoying threat. But at the same time, when you make a boss fight that like encompasses like fast enemies with guns, it just makes a miserable experience. It was fine. I did it my first try. It wasn't like it was like unbeatable or anything. I just wasn't having fun. It was nice to see him get his just desserts, but you know, ultimately as a villain, he pales in narrative strength to Nishiki and Majima. And even then, Majima was more of like a side nuisance. He wasn't really a villain. But as far as antagonists go, yeah, Yankee, you're saying again, a constant amongst many reviewers, lol, Jingu sucks. I mean, prove it wrong. He's not great. I get why he's there, though. I feel like you need to have a pure bad guy in a series like this, because it's like Nishiki. Nishiki is a very sympathetic guy. Now, maybe in the original he didn't come across like that, so he might have been up there with also sucking like Jingu. But Nishiki is a sympathetic, understandable villain. We get to see why he's doing what he's doing, and there's a logic to it. Even if it's not like an actual, like, oh, this is a logical action to do. Like, no, he's so emotionally driven, it makes him make horrible choices and mistakes. But you get why he made those mistakes, even if they're stupid. You get it, and that's cool. Jingu is just like wannabe puppet master, and I just feel like they just don't do a great job of his execution. They could have done better with him. Granted, though, he was so short in the story, it's not a huge deal. All right, let's see. Next person would be, I guess it's kind of a pair. Like the big one, like the twist that, oh gosh, now I'm forgetting her name. I just had it. Oh, I'm so tired. I'm sorry. You're catching me like I've had a long weekend. Renee, she has the bar. Reina, that's it, Reina. Reina, her story is really sad. I was genuinely surprised that she was like the informer for Nishiki, but in hindsight it makes sense. She loved him to pieces, even though he never reciprocated like for her. She always had a hope that she might be able to like be his ally and trusted friend. I thought that was a very cool exploration for her character, because she was clearly very sympathetic and didn't want people to get hurt, but she was so blinded by her own love for Nishiki that she allowed herself to be manipulated, even if she knew she was being manipulated. And that's a fun, interesting thing to explore for a character. I felt really sad how her story ended, but I think it was really good. It was a very good story. Now you bring up here so Yankee, you're saying your controversial opinions. You don't care for Shinji. I honestly liked Shinji for the role he played, but I will say this: he's hyped up as a best friend for Kiriu without very much context as to why. You have like that one thing where he helps you with the ring at the very beginning of the game, and then he kind of gives you some information until he dies. But yeah, so I get that's fair. Maybe there's a lot of people who love Shinji, and his end is really tragic. The way things go down for him is really sad. Yeah, because he literally was just trying to help and trying to be a good guy, and he literally gets executed for it. Oh, Jingu, we just had the scene there where Jingu has like that laugh, the ha 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 ha, like, oh, that laugh was terrible. But anyway, sorry, I got distracted by the video. No, the Shinji, he's meant to be like his a best bro with Kiriu. You know what they could have done with all the side stories they do? Like, you can go on like the dates with characters, you can go on these like repeated missions. Why didn't they have some like side missions with Shinji? That would have been really fun. They even had like a little bit of stuff with the florist and the detective guy. I can't ever think of his name, but like they had like some side stuff with those two where we got to see a little bit more about like the detective, like his his ailing relationship with his daughter and the shame that he has about how much he's like just like kind of just like been distant from his family. That was like a humanizing thing. Even Date, Date. And then the florist, like, okay, I will talk about him in a bit, but like, he's one of the weaker characters too, and yet I felt more related to the florist than I did to Shinji, who was clearly supposed to be this really emotional like moment, right? Why couldn't we have like, I don't know, bro dates with our man? Like, Shinji should have been like, we should have gone bowling and had Shinji like show up there randomly and be like, hey, I didn't know you liked bowling, let's go bowling together. And, you know, like have these like man dates with him and like let him flourish and share some of his story. Maybe even like talk about this girl he loves at the palace, like maybe at least once or twice, really, like in an in-depth way, before like he's laying there bleeding out. Like, I don't know, like they could have done so much more. They did, like, especially with this retro, with the remake in Kiwami, they did so much. Why couldn't they have given Shinji a better spotlight? Like, I think the story and that scene in particular would have had so much more punch, even if they just had a few little goofy side stories with Shinji, little things that would have humanized him so well and kind of established that he's still like Kiryu's friend, not just like I don't know, crony who's willing to do whatever like Kiriu wants. Like, they could have done a lot more with that. So Shinji could have been good. As far as, I don't know if I necessarily like don't like him. I feel like he's just kind of meh. Like, he's just there. Then, like, okay, so now we've gone to Shinji and Rina. Let's go to the florist. Because the florist as a character is so important to the narrative that he bears talking about. But it is really kind of sad as a character because it's still this, like, the florist is kind of, again, he's another, like, a means to an end for the plot. And they try to humanize him. But, I don't know. They took the mystique away from him in the humanization of him. And I think that was a flaw. Yankee, so last thing about, your kind of a last thought maybe for Shinji. I think it has to do, I think it has to do with the fact that Shinji was still a part of the family. Meanwhile, Kiryu at the time was going through a guy who, going to be a guy who shot Kazuma. Yeah, so, yeah, like, they needed to explain why he was still, like, willing to trust Kiriu, despite, like, everything, all the, quote, evidence, like, saying that Kiriu was basically a traitor. Like, truly a traitor. Even if he didn't agree that he took out Dojima, like, he should have been more concerned than he was. And so I think that would have been interesting to explore, too. Anyway, so, the florist, going back to that. Initially, the florist had, like, he comes off as this, like man who's in control, who like he wields his empire and he understands what he's doing and knows, like, and is doing things like the right way and by the right methods to be this manipulator, right? But then shortly after he uses his power to manipulate things to help us to get to an end, he then just becomes this guy who gets outmaneuvered, who doesn't know anything about critical information, and just kind of becomes this guy. Like, if you're gonna have an informant and he's supposed to be his world-class informant, you either need to have him be more strict with his willingness to work with the protagonist, so that he's like this, not an antagonist, but like a pseudo antagonist, where like he's like, hey, nothing's for free. If you every time he does something for Kiriu, he should require something. And he starts out that way. He starts out being like, hey, you need money, or hey, I need you to do me a favor if I'm going to help you with yours, give you a favor. Like, he starts out that way, but then he just stops. I feel like he would have been better as a character if he was constantly this backdoor dealer, this always looking for the straight line, art of the deal type person. Because that makes sense for him. It would have been much more interesting, too. Even as we get more humanized encounters with the guy, it would have been so much better if these encounters were, I guess, earned more, or maybe they put a flavor on a character who was still, like, resolute in his actions and the way he does business. It's like you get this idea, like, you do the job where you kind of, like, help out his son. and even like kind of reestablish a connection between the two, like father and son. And he should have been like, thank you for that. That I accept this as payment. And then the next time you talk to him and need information, you'd be like, all right, what are you going to pay me? But instead, he just kind of like, oh yeah, sure, I'll help you. Or yeah, sure, I'll give you what you want. It's just, I don't know. He loses a lot of the mystique that he started with, and it defanged him as a character. Still though, interesting. I'm curious to see if he comes back in the future. They kind of paint him, and that might be part of it. Like maybe in the remake, they added more to him, where in the original he really was just like a deal broker who just did 2 deals with Kiriu, and then that was it. And he like washes his hands from that point on, which makes a lot more sense for the character, but might have felt more flat, especially if he becomes a bigger player in future like Yakuza games. So maybe that's what it is. Oh, Nishiki, your evil eyes. But yeah, so that's kind of the feel I got from the florist as well. You're gonna see a running theme from this, right? I think we're pretty much at the end of like all the characters I really want to talk about. There's really nobody else that's really worth mentioning, besides some side story stuff, which I'll talk about that separately. But my opinion, ultimately, if I'm summarizing it all, that Kiriu is a fantastic character, and then Nishiki is a fantastic character. It feels like everyone else kind of got not dumbed down, but washed out is probably the better term. Not like washed out as in like, oh, you're failing, but more like the way you like painting. Like you have watercolor paints, and then like water, if you were to spritz water on a watercolor, like it would start washing out. The colors will all fade and blend together and become this kind of mud. And that's kind of what a lot of these side characters became, where they had an initial introduction where this is like, oh yeah, this is this character, this is what they do, and this is what they're about. But then by the end, they just kind of are just, oh, this is a friend. This is just an ally. This is just a supporter. This is just an antagonist. Like, they kind of just become very generic, and they lose the spark and flavor of how they were introduced. And so they could have done more with that, I hope. I feel like. All right. Now to get to some of the bread and butter. I liked the story Yakuza 0 of Yakuza Kiwami. The Yakuza 0 story absolutely dumpsters this one, but that makes sense. Yakuza original was an original title. Yakuza 0 is them like flexing their muscles and really being able to explore character development after practice, getting a more dynamic team, probably being able to have more time to work on the project. So it totally makes sense. But even so, the story is good. I feel like whilst it has some things I'm not a huge fan of in the course of it, I feel like the execution was well done. I really liked the Haruka being like the protection. I liked how we did eventually reconnect with Yumi. I really liked the antagonistic approach that we have with Nishiki. And even like the fights that we have with the Omi Alliance and with Shimano, and then with like Jingu. I feel like even then, like the delivery, the build up from where like all these things are going on, there's all these enemies surrounding us, and constantly feeling like every turn there's somebody else to fight and somebody else trying to take away what we had, was a cool atmosphere to build up. And being able to punch our way through it at the end, which is the typical for a Yakuza game, I'm sure, it felt nice. The fights might have been a little crunchy, but like they felt good to be done with. They felt like a good delivery and a fun experience to go through. So yeah, overall, pretty good. I give the story like a B plus, pretty solid. Can't have too many complaints there. Oh wait. Of course, I'm talking about characters though. Haruka's a sweetheart. She as a child character, she's great because she shows a lot of independence and a lot of her own like personality. It makes sense that she's not directly involved in a lot because she's a literal child. I feel like she was a solid motivation, and she's such a sweetheart. I'm looking forward to hopefully seeing her in future games. And then in fact, ironically, related to her, the other character that really got like dumpstered was the dog, who was a motivation during the initial contact with her, and then literally became this like stuffed dog that just like happened to be around until the end of the game. I was really sad about that. I felt like the dog would have been more fun to interact with and see more, like more story building with. But Haruka, pretty good, pretty solid, and I think that she'll be interesting to see, because I imagine like the downside being that she's going to be the obvious target if somebody's going to try and get Kiriu involved in something in the future. So I wouldn't be surprised at all if Yakuza 2 or Yakuza Kiwami 2 basically begins with Haruka getting kidnapped and being used as a means to manipulate Kiriu into getting back into the scene of things. Like, that just feels like what's going to happen, because that's kind of one of the most typical ways to involve a child in a story, is a motivation to push a character to do things that are dangerous that they normally wouldn't do. Because oftentimes that can be a struggle. It's like, why would a character who's the hero even be willing to put their life on the line? Like, you have to give them a reason. Rescuing a child's pretty solid reason. Yankee say, I feel I should state that the original Yakuza was made under a very stressful time, with Nagoshi putting his career on the line, and when it sold well after the arduous development, they promised a sequel a year later. Yeah, there you go. See, that's a great example of why you can't be too harsh on these types of original titles. There's often some massive constraints that were holding them back, or that they were limited to. It seems like a kind of scary trend in video games, especially in Japan, where people who like started these, like some of these most amazing series, literally had to like sacrifice their potential entire future to make them happen, and it worked out. Kind of makes you wonder how many game developers, like, you know, mortgaged their homes, took out massive, like, went to incredible amounts of debt, basically set themselves on career suicide in order to try and put out a game that flops and just destroyed their life, you know? Because we have, like, Yakuza, that's a good example of, like, the zero to hero type of, like, development. And then you also have, like, this also was something we saw with Muv-Luv. Muv-Luv is a perfect example of the creator of the Muv-Luv series also, like, putting their career on the line, his, like, retirement on the line, everything on the line, just hoping that his game would be successful. That's scary. Like, that's impressive, but terrifying. Because, like, you got to think, for every one success, there must have been, like, 10, 20 failures. People who did the exact same thing, had the exact same motivation and gumption, who utterly failed. It's crazy to me. Crazy to imagine. But, yeah, I am excited to see how things play out in the future. All right, so let's see. I talked about the main plot and story. I think it was pretty well done. Overall, I'm pretty happy with the way it was executed and the way it was brought about. I think there's a lot of promise, and there's a reason why the series continues to this day. Because the seeds that were planted here in the Yakuza 1 and, like, the remake that is kind of hinted at in the remake goes to show just how much care and passion went into this series. And the fact that they still have many new stories to tell with the characters is really cool and super impressive. Let's see. Yeah, I think that's pretty much everybody. Like, there's a lot of other characters that are side story characters, but there's not a whole lot I feel like I can say about them other than the fact that they were kind of there and they played their roles. Yankee, you continue. Because SEGA didn't want to romanticize Yakuza, which is why it's called Ryogan Gokuto, like a dragon in Japan, but Western localizers wanted to highlight it, so Yakuza was the name chosen. Okay, that makes sense. Yeah, because there's it's like, you can romanticize mafias and Yakuza when you don't have to deal with them. Like, they sound like really interesting stories and make really interesting narratives to explore, but when push comes to shove, like they ruined people's lives. So yeah, I totally get why you would want to be careful with how you display that in context of the culture and of the city that you be. Like, I wonder if something similar happened with the mafia games or mafia movies, because those are like classics in America. But imagine if you tried to localize them in Italy, I could see them changing the names too, because, like, despite the fact that the context is literally about, like, those, like, crime families, you don't want to be you would still want to take, like, a step back because of the negative connotation and impact that those families had on real people's lives and living memories when these games and stories came out. So yeah, that makes a lot of sense. All right, so let's get to the other half of the game. which is actually all the side stories. I don't know how many side stories are in the original, but I gotta say, I love the side stories. They are definitely a major reason why you play these games, because they're so wacky and fun and just interesting. And I love it because they put this really fun juxtaposition between the super serious story and the super goofy characters. Like the fact that you can have a Kiriu who is like literally willing to punch his way through entire families, getting shot multiple times just to try and like save people's lives. And also the Kiriu who, like, I don't know, goes and like beats up mascots or buys wacky dresses for girls in dance clubs, or gets suckered into so many scams. Somebody made showed me a meme, like my friend who kind of got me into the Yakuza games. He sent me a meme saying like comparison between Yakuza 0 and Yakuza Kiwami. It's like Yakuza 0, I was like, oh, look at this fun, interesting side story where we talk about a meta experience involving Japanese culture or like the character whose story we're following. And then Yakuza 0 says, scam. It's a scam. It's another scam. Yeah, there's so many scams for side stories in this game. But even then, they're goofy, wacky, and kind of fun. I enjoyed them. There's like so many moments where I just burst out laughing, busting my gut. Like the Pocket Circuit race, which obviously is an inheritance from the first game because it makes so many references to the first game. Like, it's dripping with just nostalgia, but it still was wacky and fun. The Battle Beatles game, just an absurd reason to have scantily clad girls fighting. And again, don't know if that was in the original or not. I doubt it. It feels like another holdover from like the battle ring that was in Zero. It was just like a reflavored version of it. So for whatever reason, that was there. But just that wackiness and that fun, the willingness to be able to kind of step out of like the serious tones of blood and violence and just have like a fun time is great. Going on dates with people, going to karaoke, like so cool and so well done. Reina, the dates with the girl, Rina or Nia, I can't remember her name. Gosh darn it. Like, that's the downside, the way that the story's done. Like, a lot of stuff doesn't, like, a lot of character names don't stick as well as they probably should. But like, they were just so enjoyable. And the random encounters were always really fun and wacky. I especially loved, like, the ones that like kept chaining, like those guys that kept trying to mug Kiriu and he keeps beating the crap out of them, and so they just keep bringing more guys and just keep getting flattened by him. Like that chain was so fun and just goofy, and like goofy's just the word, but I love it. All the goofiness is so enjoyable. So, and that's something I think is really interesting because you look at again kind of crime-based games I keep thinking of that I played. GTA 5, which is like, it's got its goofy wackiness, but it's always like leans more on the cruel and like violent side of it. So you never really escape like the kind of the grit of the story, even when like things go completely off the rails, especially with Trevor. But then you also have like, well, the counterpart I also think of is Saints Row, where Saints Row 1 kind of tried to walk a similar line with Yakuza, where it was like it had a story, like a serious story with serious characters at its core, but it had a lot of side goofy stories and side quests you could do. And then you get to like Saints Row 2, and they like, okay, so now the main story, while it is kind of serious, still gets pretty goofy. And then the side stories are super goofy, aka one of the main side stories that gives you some of the best perks in the game involves you driving around a waste management truck with a hose on the top, spraying buildings with crap. And that's like a whole series of minigames. Or insurance fraud, where you intentionally throw yourself into vehicles to try and rack up as much insurance claims as you can. Like, it's so ridiculous and wacky and fun. But then Saints Row kind of keeps going and going and going, and by the time they get to Saints Row 4, it's like, story? Who needs plot? I just want to beat people with a giant dildo. Like, it really lost itself because it lost that balance. And then GTA, I feel like, again, it has its wacky moments and its wacky side stories, but ultimately it's so serious that the wacky stuff feels like a fever dream. But when push comes to shove, the way that they do it in this game, in Yakuza 0 and in Kiwami, as far as I can experience, it blends it so well. I feel like it's the perfect balance between the two. Yankee, you said, those wacky sub-stories from Zero helped boost Western popularity. You see the gif of Nugget from Zero, and it's a lot easier to jump into the series from the beginning instead of in Yakuza 4 or 5. Yeah, that's very true. So, are the wacky side stories, were they at all present in the original? Or is that something that basically became a staple because of the expansion into new audiences, and like maybe it became something that became more prevalent in later titles and then they brought back for these newer titles? I could see that being a case too, where like the wacky side stories become more prominent as the series went on, kind of like what Saints Row did, but just not to such wild extremes, which is good. Now I wonder if it can be taken too far. Probably does at some points, but so far I wouldn't say it has been. I think it's been really fun and really interesting, so I'm really curious to see where they take things from here in the future. But I think about it to this day. Probably my favorite moment was this was in the side story sequence with the Yakuza like understudy, like the guy who wants to be your apprentice. And the story with like the girl who we had to collect money from, like her fight was super dumb where she's just dodging like crazy and it was hard to even like land a hit on her. But like the whole sequence where we're trying to sneak up on her, we're doing like the freaking Scooby-Doo type of like creeping, and then she's like, I sense a presence. That whole sequence cracks me up to this day. I think about it occasionally and I'm like that was amazing. But yeah. So side stories, they're kind of the bread and butter in a lot of ways. Like they're fun. I like how it like shakes things up a bit. It can be a bit overwhelming sometimes, yes, but more often than not, it was a pleasant distraction and a fun surprise. Oh, by the way, I'm going to say this right here again because it's highlighted here. The fact that they ended this sequence with the ending with Haruka abandoning the dog, that was horrible. I hated that. Why did they think that was a good idea? So, I know it's a complete deviation, but I just saw like that ending there, and it reminded me of that after credit scene that plays where they just abandoned that dog, and that made me mad, genuinely mad. Like, why? At the very least, take it to a shelter. Stupid. Anyway, Yankee, you said the original had wacky sub-stories, but I don't think something like Kiriu helping a girl get a pizza could exist in the original Yakuza. Yeah. I forgot about the Pizza Visa one. That was great. The scam sub-stories are probably the scam sub-stories were probably in the original. That would make sense. Yeah. I could see that actually being on theme with the rest of the game, so I could see them choosing to have a bunch of scam side stories. Yeah. But I'm happy to know that the side stories having wackiness to them is something that will be that will probably be present in 2, and I'm guessing by the time we get to 3 or 4, even if it's toned down to what I've gotten used to, I'm guessing they'll still be there, and that'll be cool. I'm very excited about that. But yeah, so I feel like that's pretty much everything. I'm very happy with Yakuza 0 and Yakuza Kiwami. And I'm planning to play Yakuza Kiwami 2, but it won't be right away. Oh, weird question from you, Yankee. How do you feel about Shimano after him being more prevalent in 0? 0, he wasn't even super prominent in 0, other than the fact that it made it pretty clear that he was the kind of guy who would break taboo if it meant getting what he wanted. I liked how Shimano was part of the reason that Nishiki became the kind of person he was. Like, you don't see Nishiki, the seed of who Nishiki was planted by Shimano, who was the first person to confront him and be like, hey, you're being an idiot. So, like, I liked that because he almost was an inadvertent, quote, mentor to Nishiki, which, because Nishiki's story is so good, I like that he was involved there. The power play he makes sense in this game. So he makes a pretty decent antagonist, even if he's like a very minor one, because that's the thing too. It's like Shimano wasn't even necessarily Kiryu's antagonist. It felt like he was Kazuma's antagonist, and Kiryu was just caught in the crossfire. And I kind of liked that. I liked how it felt like other machinations and other decisions and other like intrigues and issues were going on, that the whole world wasn't revolving around Kiriu. That always helps the story it makes the story feel bigger. You say, Genki continues, Shimano had an original fighting style in the OG Yakuza, which is upsetting which is upsetting that they copied Mr. Shakedown and Kiwami. Oh, okay, that's interesting. I hadn't made that connection, but that does make sense. So Shimano's fight style was like his own thing, which made him probably a really interesting fight in the original game. And he was an interesting fight in this game. But then Mr. Shakedown copied him. Yeah, okay, I could see that being annoying. Because having unique fighting styles is kind of like, not the bread and butter for a Yakuza game, but it's one of the things that sticks in people's heads long after they stop playing. Like, you'll remember the characters in the story, sure, but you'll also remember some of those fights that were just really, really hard. Let's see. Yeah. Okay, Kiwani's copied Zero Shakedown. Oh, okay, so I got that backwards. Oh, that's even worse then. So if Shimano had his own original fighting style and then they erased it and replaced it with the Mr. Shakedown one, that is sad. Yeah, that's not good. That's annoying. Well, it is what it is, I suppose. Can't really do much for that. I guess if there's one thing I think would be more interesting to explore in a Yakuza game, I feel like the Yakuza games, if I wanted to see something in future Yakuza games, I would want to see more play with the actual Yakuza family dynamic. Like, besides the fact that you hear people talking about the rivalries and the fact that the Omni Alliance showed up to attack Kazuma at some point, it feels like the politics between the families is just something you kind of hear about. I feel like it would be more interesting if you actually saw, like, different families at odds and maybe could participate in some of the turf wars, which is something that I did really enjoy about Saints Row, like the Saints Row 2 game especially. I feel like the turf war they had, which was the major driving plot for that game, like the mechanic where you would go and like take control of rackets in different areas and like flip them to your side, that would be a fun and interesting aspect to explore about Yakuza. But again, you talked about before how like it's a little touchy and there were probably heavy restrictions on the types of stories they could explore themed around Yakuza in Japan. Maybe that aspect of like doing shakedowns, taking over, putting pressure on businesses and families might have been too much for what the game if they wanted to have the game be published. So it definitely isn't something that was explored, but I almost wish it had been. I think it would have been very interesting to get a look into like the dynamics of like the internal and external conflicts of of the Yakuza families themselves. But again, with Kiryu being such a he's like the eye of a hurricane. He's like this calm, like happy middle where like as long as he's being left alone, he's just having a good time. But then like everything around him is just constantly on fire. It's pretty good, though. All right. So I feel like that's about all I'm going to say with this, other than the fact that, again, I'm looking forward to playing Kiwami 2. I'm looking forward to exploring the games. I'm really interested in getting to the point where we get to the more modern Yakuza games, but I'm determined to get there with the context. But, like, the Majima-based game that just came out looks like it'll be a lot of fun. I want to see the spin-off series, I think it's the Like a Dragon series. I'm very excited to see that. Oh, John, you say Kiwami 2 has very funny ragdolls. Oh, that'll be even better. That'll be real fun. I already think it's like the physics in the fights are already pretty wacky. Like how, especially Majima fights, when he would do his like breakdancing move, and he like if he would breakdance into like objects, he'd just send them flying. Like that was always pretty fun. But yeah, we'll have to see. Very excited to get to Kiwami 2, but we're gonna have a bit of a deviation from that. I got another series I need to jump into. I've already said before, but well, I guess I'll just say it now because like we're wrapping up here. So I said before, I fall in love with two game series pretty much at the same time. Yakuza and Legend of Heroes Trails in the Sky. So we're going to be bouncing between them because especially now that I'm working like full time and have been for a while, I just don't have time to do them both at the same time, unfortunately, and do them justice. Heck, I am really struggling to even keep up the Baldur's Gate stuff. Like that's taking so much longer than it should. But so yeah, like we're gonna take a bit of a break from Yakuza. We're gonna step away and we're gonna jump back into like the Legend of Heroes series, which is gonna be really fun. But yeah, so yeah, I'm gonna end this video. I'm gonna say my goodbyes real quick, and then we're gonna play the intro trailer from the Steam page for the next game we're gonna be playing. But thank you so much for joining me today. It was really fun having your input. It's nice knowing these these side stories and like these kind of contextual behind the scenes things. I'm really grateful that you shared that with me. That helps a lot, and it's nice to have that context because that's not something I'm going to stumble onto very easily when I'm trying to avoid spoilers so heavily. But I'm very, very excited to see where the story goes from here. Thank you so much for your time, especially if you're watching this like after it's been uploaded. Thank you for watching and participating. I try and read the comments here, but I will say comments on like archived live streams don't tend to send me notifications when they do. So I'll try and check up on it, but like if you leave a comment and I don't respond, it's probably because I didn't even know you left it. So apologies for that, but there's not really much I can do about that besides manually checking for a few weeks afterwards, and that's easily something I can forget. But been a very fun story, been a very fun series. I'm very happy with finding it and finally playing it, and I'm excited to see where the stories will take us all from here. But thank you so much for joining me. Thank you so much for being a part of the channel. I appreciate each and every one of you, especially if you're a patron or a member. Like, I don't deserve you. I just hope I can keep making content that keeps you coming back for more. But yeah, I hope you have a great time, and I hope that you're looking forward to the next series we cover on the channel. So have a good night. Thank you so much. And until next video, you're watching me. Happy to see me in next. I'll see you there. See you. Bye. Goodbye, everyone.
Come